When your own wife straps into the last helicopter out of a burning mountain and gives your seat to the man she almost married, you don't just feel replaced, you feel erased. Then the radio goes dead. The fire swallows the western ridge, and the base turns into a ghost town before the smoke even clears. Lauren lifted that Bell 412 off the pad at Silver Ridge with Mason Vale buckled into the spot that had my name written on it. There was no confusion, no last-minute mix-up. My name was still fresh on the evacuation board when she erased it with a grease pencil. The fire had already jumped the western ridge, and Lauren knew the weather would seal the air corridor before she could turn back. She took Mason anyway, along with that red waterproof case he called medical cargo, and left me standing under a sky raining ash. They expected me to fade quietly, to sign the report they had already drafted, to nod and collect whatever compliance certificate would make them rich. Lauren counted on 8 years of marriage to keep me obedient, and Mason counted on my 45% of the company to be squeezed out at a discount once everyone saw me as the bitter husband who abandoned his post. They were dead wrong about why I stayed behind. They were dead wrong about what the radio system had recorded that afternoon. And they were most wrong about what I would do once loyalty stopped being a duty and became a weapon aimed straight at my chest. By the time Lauren finally came back, the base was empty. I had taken no company property, damaged no aircraft, threatened no one. I had simply stopped protecting people who had already decided my life was worth less than their next deal. The evacuation order hit at 4:17 in the afternoon, right as the wind swung hard from the southwest and shoved a black wall of smoke straight across Silver Ridge. I was inside the mobile ops trailer when the incident printer started spitting out updated fire maps. And the red boundary on the newest sheet cut right through the forest road we used for fuel and supplies. Outside, rotors beat the hot air into dizzy circles while firefighters scrambled toward the last 2 transport trucks. Tom Baines, the county incident commander, walked in with ash crusted in the folds of his yellow shirt and said, "Air corridor closes at 5, no exceptions, the canyon is already making its own wind." I glanced at the clock, then at the evacuation board. We had 1 Summit rescue helicopter still on the pad, a Bell 412 set up for crew and medical transport, with Lauren as chief pilot and Wade Porter as her co-pilot. After fuel, equipment, and the 2 injured firefighters already loaded, there was exactly 1 spare seat left. My name was written in that final slot. I had stayed to shut down the portable fuel system, transfer the incident records, and confirm every Summit employee had cleared the base. As operations director and safety officer, I was supposed to be the last one out, but that did not mean I was supposed to be left behind. Mason Vale walked in behind Baines, clutching that red waterproof case against his chest. He was our business development director, a 10% shareholder, and the guy Lauren nearly married before she met me. He wore clean flight boots that had never seen a burn line and a company jacket that somehow had 0 ash on it. "I need to be on that aircraft," he announced. "This is medical coordination material for the state desk." I spotted the brass asset tag riveted beside the handle. That case belonged to business development. I had seen it in our Missoula conference room during acquisition meetings with Continental Emergency Systems. "Medical coordination goes through Baines," I said. "The state desk already has the patient sheets electronically." Mason kept his eyes fixed on Lauren, who had stepped into the trailer with her helmet tucked under one arm. "The connection is failing," he insisted. "If those documents don't reach Helena tonight, the reimbursement window closes." Lauren glanced at the evacuation board, and her face did not even twitch when she saw my name. "Caleb can take the service road," she said, like she was suggesting a minor detour. Even the radio chatter seemed to freeze. Baines pointed at the fire map. "That road is under evacuation, it may already be cut." Lauren set her helmet on the table. "The helicopter is overweight if we take both. Mason has the patient reimbursement package. Caleb knows the terrain and has a shelter kit. I also have the assigned seat," I said, my voice flat. She finally looked at me. 8 years of marriage, and I knew the tiny movements of her face better than any flight instrument. Her jaw tightened, not with fear but with impatience. "Do not make this personal," she said. That sentence told me more than any confession ever could. Mason moved toward the door, and I stepped between him and the pad, not threatening, just blocking the quickest route. "Open the case for the incident commander," I said. "If it's medical cargo, he can verify it and amend the manifest." Mason gripped the handle harder. "Those files are confidential. Medical files can be verified without being read, and the case weight belongs on the manifest." Lauren picked up her helmet. "We do not have time for one of your procedure lectures. Procedure is the only reason rescue aircraft don't become additional emergencies," I shot back. Baines reached for his radio. But before he could speak, an explosion rolled through the valley. A propane tank at an abandoned maintenance shed had gone up beyond the tree line. Everyone turned toward the sound, and the smoke column folded toward us like a dark wave. Lauren used those 3 seconds. She took the grease pencil from the board, erased my name, and wrote Mason in fresh white letters. I stared at that new name. "You are making a command decision," I said. "State it clearly." Her voice went formal. "I am transporting the medical liaison required for continuity of care. The operations director has volunteered to complete base closure and depart by ground." I have not volunteered. Wade appeared at the door. "Lauren, we need to lift now." Baines stepped forward, but 2 crews were calling him at once. A tanker had lost pressure on the north line, and his command responsibility suddenly became bigger than our single aircraft. Lauren walked past me, her shoulders striking mine lightly but deliberately. Mason followed with the case. I could have dragged him back, could have stood in front of the helicopter, but either choice would have turned a documented betrayal into a physical brawl. And they would have used that to bury everything that followed. So I did what I had been trained to do when a situation turns dangerous and emotional. I observed, I remembered, I preserved. I pulled out my phone and photographed the evacuation board before anyone could erase it again. The timestamp visible on the incident clock above it. Then I photographed the load sheet clipped beside the door. It listed the red case at 38 pounds under emergency medical support, but the handwriting was Mason's, not Wade's or Lauren's. The helicopter lifted at 4:31. Lauren did not look down. Mason did. Through the side window, he met my eyes and rested one hand on the red case between his boots. The aircraft banked east and disappeared into smoke. At 4:38, Baines got confirmation that the service road was blocked by falling timber 2 miles below the base. At 4:42, the weather station reported gusts above the return limit. At 4:47, the air corridor closed. I was alone except for a county mechanic who left in the last truck before the road fully failed. Baines had been pulled to the northern line by command vehicle. He offered me a place, but the truck could not wait while I secured aviation fuel and power. I told him I would activate my locator and move toward the old ranger station on foot. That was a choice I actually made. I shut the fuel valves, killed power to the pumps, photographed every gauge, and uploaded the base closure checklist through the incident terminal. I left the originals in the locked records box, clipped my personal locator beacon to my vest, and stepped away from the pad. The first embers were already landing on the trailer roof. I looked once at the empty space where the helicopter had been. 8 years of marriage and 12 years of building Summit had ended in one clean decision. Lauren had chosen Mason, acquisition, and a lie she expected me to carry. I turned toward the Ranger Trail. But before I crossed the tree line, I opened the company's safety app on my phone and issued a preservation notice for every flight record, radio transmission, manifest, asset scan, and message connected to the Silver Ridge evacuation. It was the first order I had ever issued against my own wife. The trail to the ranger station was less than 4 miles on a map, but fire makes distance dishonest. Smoke erased familiar turns twice, and I had to leave the path because burning branches had fallen across it. I stayed low where the air was clearer, checked the wind with strips of dry grass, and used the creek bed whenever the slope allowed. My locator beacon transmitted every 50 seconds. That signal was meant to bring help, but it also created a record no company officer could rewrite. At 6:09, I reached the old ranger station. The building had a metal roof, a cleared perimeter, and a county emergency radio locked in a cabinet. My operations key opened it because Summit had helped equip the site 3 years earlier. I checked in with Baines, and his relief was immediate, then replaced by anger when I told him exactly why I was there. "Lauren reported that you chose to stay," he said. "I said the opposite in front of you. I know what I heard." The formal aviation report came through 12 minutes later. It said I assumed ground evacuation responsibility. The report had been written before anyone knew whether I was alive. I asked Baines to preserve his incident log and the raw command channel recording. I did not ask him to take my side, only to protect public records under normal retention rules. He repeated the request over the recorded channel so no one could later say it had been private or improper. The fire moved north during the night, and a county crew reached the station shortly after dawn, taking me to a temporary command post. I had smoke in my lungs, burns no worse than a bad sunburn on one forearm, and 11 unanswered calls from Lauren. Her 12th call came while a medic was checking my oxygen level. "Where are you?" she demanded, no greeting, no question about whether I was hurt. "At the county command post," I said. She exhaled. "Thank God. Listen, The state is confused about the manifest. Mason had to be listed as medical support or they wouldn't reimburse the flight. We can correct the wording later. You reported that I volunteered. You did stay to close the base after you removed me from the helicopter. Her voice dropped. This is not a conversation to have on an open line. Then send me your explanation in writing. She went silent. I had spent years smoothing problems before they reached her, adjusting rotations when pilots complained she scheduled too aggressively, rebuilding contracts when Mason promised services our certificates did not cover, delaying my own distributions when cash was tight so payroll cleared. They had come to believe my restraint was a natural resource. That morning, I stopped supplying it. From a county workstation, I logged into Summit through my authorized account. The preservation notice had triggered automatic copies to our outside compliance archive. I confirmed it covered the original weight and balance form, the dispatch log, the aircraft tracking data, and the asset inventory. Then I placed the Silver Ridge aircraft on a limited safety stand-down pending inspection and crew review. I did not ground the fleet. I did not touch payroll. I acted only within the authority written into the safety manual that Lauren herself had signed. At 8:26, Mason called. You need to lift that stand down, he said. Continental has people arriving tomorrow. The aircraft was used in a disputed emergency evacuation with an inaccurate manifest. No one was injured. That was not guaranteed when Lauren took off. He tried a softer voice. Caleb, I understand you feel embarrassed. We can manage this inside the family. Mason had never called us family before. What was in the red case? I asked. Patient coordination files. Then authorize the state auditor to verify them. You are overstepping. I am asking about cargo carried under my safety authority and billed to a public incident. He ended the call. The acquisition was scheduled to close in 19 days. Continental Emergency Systems wanted Summit because we held a valuable state rescue contract, maintained a clean safety record, and had 6 aircraft positioned across Montana. The purchase agreement required a compliance certificate signed by both Lauren as chief pilot and me as operations and safety director. My signature represented 12 years of maintenance records, flight limitations, training files, and incident disclosures. At 9:04, I notified Continental that my compliance certificate was withdrawn pending investigation. I did not accuse anyone of fraud. I stated 3 facts: passenger priority had been altered, the manifest was disputed, and an inaccurate incident report had been submitted under my department's name. Then I notified Summit's bank that no officer could use my individual guarantee for new acquisition-related borrowing without written consent. Years earlier, I had personally guaranteed our first hangar loan. Mason had recently circulated papers that would roll several deal expenses into a bridge facility. I had not signed them, and now I never would. My final action that morning was personal. I transferred my military pension deposit and salary into an account in my name, leaving every dollar already in our joint account untouched. I canceled the voluntary monthly transfer that paid Lauren's separate mountain club membership and the lease on Mason's company sport utility vehicle. Business expenses now needed 2 authorized approvals. As our operating agreement required, I was not emptying accounts, I was ending favors. Rachel Kim met me at a diner outside Helena that afternoon. She had drafted Summit's partnership agreement 6 years earlier and knew exactly where its weak points lived. I placed my phone, the board photograph, and the base checklist on the table. Tell me what you want, she said. Preservation, my inspection rights, a lawful separation, and no agreement that requires me to repeat their lie. Do you want revenge? I looked through the window at smoke spreading across the highway. I want every consequence they tried to assign to me returned to the person who earned it. Rachel nodded once. Then you will need patience. They control 55% together. They control votes, they do not control the records. When I reached Missoula that evening, Lauren's car was not at our house. A printed copy of the false incident report was waiting in my email with a signature block highlighted in yellow. I replied with 4 words, I will not sign. Summit's headquarters occupied an old freight hangar on the east side of the Missoula airport. I had negotiated the lease, designed the dispatch room, and installed the first maintenance shelves with my own hands. 2 days after Silver Ridge, my access badge flashed red at the employee entrance. Lauren opened the door from inside. Mason stood behind her with our human resources consultant and a security guard I had hired the previous winter. You are temporarily suspended, Lauren said, wearing her chief pilot uniform even though she had no flight scheduled. It was a costume of authority, clean and exact. On what grounds? I asked. Mason handed me a letter: disruptive conduct, unauthorized interference with operations, and reputational harm. I read the board resolution attached to it. Lauren's 45% and Mason's 10% had carried the vote. My salary would continue for 14 days. I was ordered to surrender my badge and company computer. You prepared this quickly? You threatened the acquisition within hours of reaching safety, Lauren replied. We had to protect 60 employees from your reaction. 48 employees, I said. You counted seasonal contractors twice in the buyer presentation. Mason's expression sharpened. That number was in a confidential schedule he thought I had not reviewed. I handed over the badge and laptop without argument. I had preserved company records through the approved archive, copied no customer data, taken no private files. I did not need to break a rule to prove that they had. We can still fix this, Lauren said as the guard stepped aside. Sign the corrected incident report and the compliance certificate. We'll withdraw the suspension after closing. Corrected how? She placed a second report on a tool cart. This version no longer said I volunteered. It said changing fire conditions had separated me from the flight crew before final boarding. I was standing beside the helicopter. There was confusion. You erased my name while I watched. Mason leaned closer. You are putting a marriage dispute ahead of the company. You brought your relationship with my wife onto an emergency aircraft. I am putting the truth ahead of your purchase bonus. The guard looked at Mason, the HR consultant looked at the floor. Lauren's face went pale, but she did not deny the relationship. Careful, Caleb. I have been careful for 12 years. That is why all 3 versions of the report will survive. I left the hangar without raising my voice. By noon, Rachel had delivered 3 notices. The first demanded shareholder inspection of Summit's financial records, acquisition communications, board minutes, and incident files. The second placed the other shareholders on notice that my 45% could not be diluted or transferred without the protections in our operating agreement. The third began a legal separation and requested preservation of marital financial records. I signed every notice myself. Rachel explained the procedure, but the decisions were mine. Lauren came to the house that night. She found me in the garage sorting personal tools from company equipment that had been stored there for years. I left every item with a Summit inventory sticker on the right side of the room. You filed for separation, she said. Yes. Because of one flight? I set down a socket wrench. When one seat was left, you showed me exactly where I ranked. Mason had to reach the buyer's team. The documents in that case protected the company. Then why call it medical cargo? She crossed her arms. Because Baines would not have approved a business passenger. There it was, not the whole truth, but an admission of purpose. I did not reach for my phone. I was not secretly recording her, and a private marital argument would never be the foundation of my case. Was Mason in your hotel room in Denver last month? I asked. Her eyes shifted toward the shelves. The buyer conference in Denver had produced 2 hotel charges for 1 room and a meal receipt signed by Lauren at 1:13 in the morning. I had seen both while approving expenses at the time. She said the hotel had consolidated bookings. That has nothing to do with Silver Ridge. It has everything to do with why you trusted his future more than my life. She sat on the hood of her car, and for the first time she looked tired instead of controlled. Continental offered me command of its Western Flight Division, she said. It is the opportunity one have worked for my entire career. Mason negotiated it. If we miss this closing, the offer disappears. So you needed the case delivered. Yes. And you needed my signature afterward. We both benefit from the sale, not equally. She did not answer. The next morning, Summit sent me a proposed buyout valuing my shares at less than half the number used in the Continental transaction. The explanation cited contract risk and reputational damage caused by my own safety report. They were trying to use the decline they had created to purchase my interest cheaply. The offer also required me to release all claims, approve every incident filing, and agree that Lauren had exercised proper command judgment. I rejected it in writing. Then I filed my formal report with the State Aviation Safety Office and the County Incident Authority. I attached only records I possessed lawfully: my board photograph, my base closure submission, my locator beacon history, and the 2 incident reports sent to me for signature, and I identified the additional records that the agencies could request directly. That distinction mattered. I was not dumping company files in public view. I was giving the proper authorities enough verified information to begin. Dana Hale called the next day. She had investigated aviation incidents for 23 years and sounded unimpressed by emotion. "Mr. Reed, are you alleging that the aircraft was unsafe?" "I am alleging that a rescue flight carried a business passenger in business cargo under a medical classification, displaced the assigned final evacuee, and produced a false report." "That is a serious allegation. That is why I did not make it on social media." "Your wife says you stayed voluntarily because you were trained for ground survival." "My training did not give her permission to lie." Dana paused. "I will request the original records. Do not contact witnesses about their testimony." "I will not." After the call, I stood in the quiet house and looked at the framed photograph from the day Lauren and I bought our first helicopter. We had believed ownership meant freedom. Somewhere along the way, she had decided it meant the freedom to spend my loyalty without asking. They still needed my signature, they still needed my shares, now they also needed the records to say something the records did not say. For the first time since the helicopter left, I knew they were more trapped than I was. Mason's version of Silver Ridge reached the public before the state investigator reached the hangar. An article appeared in a regional business journal under the headline "Internal Dispute Threatens Montana Rescue Operator During Fire Season," describing Lauren as a decorated pilot who had made a difficult decision under pressure. Calling Mason a medical coordination specialist, and painting me as a vengeful husband who had blocked an acquisition after being asked to complete routine ground duties. No one quoted me because no one had called me. By the end of the day, local television stations had repeated the story, and a photograph of Lauren beside the helicopter ran under words like hero and leadership. My old Coast Guard service was mentioned only to suggest that I had been fully capable of walking out. The attack was effective because it used true pieces arranged around a lie. 3 employees sent messages asking me to stop risking their jobs. One mechanic wrote that his daughter's medical insurance depended on Summit. A dispatcher named Eli Navarro sent nothing at all. Eli had been at Silver Ridge, had prepared the original weight sheet before Mason altered the cargo line, and maintained the backup radio cache that copied transmissions whenever the internet link failed. I did not call him. Dana had told me not to contact witnesses, and I would not give Mason a reason to claim coordination. Instead, I wrote a short statement for Rachel to release. I had filed a confidential safety report regarding passenger priority, manifest accuracy, and incident reporting. I would cooperate with the state review and make no public accusation beyond the records. Summit's employees deserved uninterrupted pay and safe operations. It was not dramatic enough for television, that was the point. The first real blow landed 2 days later. The state suspended Summit from new wildfire task orders while Dana conducted an initial review. Existing medical transfer work could continue, but the seasonal contract that supplied nearly a third of our summer revenue went silent. Lauren blamed me in an all-employee meeting. I knew because the HR consultant included her comments in the official minutes. And my shareholder inspection rights covered board and management records. Caleb chose escalation, she told them. Management is working to contain the damage. Contain me, she meant. The company. Petition family court for a temporary order preventing either spouse from making extraordinary financial or business changes. Mason's declaration claimed I might use my old bank guarantee to interfere with operating credit. The court issued a narrow temporary restriction before a full hearing. I could not alter joint business guarantees or move marital assets, but I had not planned to do either. The order gave Mason another headline and froze my ability to refinance the house, making my financial position tighter. My salary ended after the 14-day suspension period. Legal and expert review costs began arriving. The value of my shares existed on paper, but I could not use them to buy groceries. For the first time, I understood how they expected to win. They did not need to disprove the records immediately, they only needed to keep me unemployed, publicly isolated, and financially pressed until I signed. I rented a desk in a small office near the airport and built a wall chart from information available through my inspection demand and personal records. Rachel wanted a litigation chronology, I wanted an operational picture. At the center was the last seat. Around it were 4 questions. Who changed the passenger priority? What was in the red case? Who created the false incident report? What did Lauren and Mason gain if I signed? The state answered the first question sooner than expected. Bain's incident office produced a photograph taken at 4:22 by a county logistics technician showing the evacuation board with my name in the final passenger slot. My own photograph at 4:29 showed Mason's name written over the erased area. The board itself had been destroyed by fire, but 2 independent images documented the change. Dana requested the digital manifest. Summit gave her a file created at 4:33, 2 minutes after takeoff, listing Mason as medical support. The approved flight planning system recorded user activity, including edits. Dana did not tell me whose login had made the change, but the preservation notice prevented the history from being overwritten. The company's lawyers tried to stop my inspection demand, arguing that I wanted confidential acquisition details for a competing business. I had no competing business, but the accusation still delayed production by 9 days, long enough for Continental to pressure me directly. Its regional vice president called from a recorded corporate conference line with Rachel present. "Mr. Reed, we are prepared to place your sale proceeds in escrow while the safety matter is resolved," he said. "All we require now is your compliance certificate, a certificate stating that every material incident has been accurately disclosed, with a schedule noting an internal disagreement. There is no disagreement about whether I was on the aircraft. Your refusal may destroy value for every shareholder. Then your purchase price depends on a fact you have not verified." The vice president became colder. "Mason assured us the state matter was caused by marital conflict. Ask Mason to certify the records himself. The agreement requires you." Then the agreement recognizes that my judgment has value. The call ended without a signature. That evening, Lauren came to the office. She closed the door behind her and placed a photograph on my desk, the two of us after a mountain rescue 5 years earlier, exhausted and smiling beside a patient's family. "This is who we are," she said. "It is who we were when the person in danger mattered more than the deal. Mason says Continental will walk if you do not sign by Friday." "What did the red case contain?" "You know what he told you." "I know he refused verification." She pressed both palms against the desk. "If the sale dies, people lose money. I lose the division. You lose millions. Is punishing me worth that? You still think this is punishment for choosing Mason? Is it not?" I slid the court order toward her. "You suspended me, cut off my income, accused me publicly, and tried to buy my shares at half price. Yet you came here because you still need me to make your statement true." Her eyes moved to the wall chart. She saw the 4 questions and the empty space beneath each. "You cannot prove what was in that case," she said. It was the first time either of them had admitted that the contents mattered. I watched her leave, then added her sentence to my private chronology, labeled clearly as my recollection rather than evidence. The next morning, Dana issued an order temporarily removing Lauren from command authority on state rescue flights until the passenger and cargo classifications were resolved. She could still fly private medical transfers under company supervision, but she could no longer make final evacuation decisions for public incidents. Lauren had built her identity around being the person who decided who came home for the first time. That authority no longer belonged to her. Dana's temporary order changed the atmosphere inside Summit faster than any public statement could. Pilots who had ignored my messages began asking whether their own incident reports might be reviewed. Maintenance staff stopped treating Mason's requests as commands unless they arrived through the approved system. Lauren still held 45% of the company, but the state had reminded everyone that ownership did not create operational authority. The first production under my shareholder inspection arrived the same afternoon. Mason's lawyers had delivered thousands of pages in no useful order, expecting volume to become fog. I spent 2 nights sorting invoices, asset logs, acquisition schedules, and flight records. Rachel offered to hire a review team. I hired one accountant for the financial schedules. But I read every aviation record myself, not because I distrusted help, but because I knew how Summit's systems connected. The red case appeared in an inventory scan from the morning of the evacuation, its description reading Executive Transaction File Case. Mason had signed it out at 7:12, and the listed destination was the Continental closing room in Helena. No medical department had custody of it at any point. That proved classification, not contents. The contents surfaced through a more ordinary record. At 8:03 the next morning, a Continental administrative assistant had acknowledged delivery of original disclosure schedules, executive employment terms, and shareholder signature packets. The acknowledgement included the same asset tag visible in my photograph. Mason had risked my life to move paper that protected a deal. I sent the inventory entry and acknowledgement to Dana, the county billing auditor, and Rachel. I did not send them to the press. Dana called an hour later. "Did you obtain these through your inspection rights?" "Yes." Summit produced both. "Do you have any reason to believe the acknowledgement is false?" "No. Continental can authenticate it." "Then let me authenticate it." Her caution did not frustrate me. It was exactly what I wanted. Every step needed to survive people who did not know me and did not care about my marriage. The aircraft tracking record created a second problem for Lauren. She had claimed smoke forced an immediate direct flight to the state medical desk in Helena, but satellite data showed she first landed at a private airport outside the city where Continental had reserved a conference room. The helicopter remained there for 26 minutes before continuing to Summit's base. The 2 injured firefighters had already been transferred to a county medical aircraft at the main evacuation hub, and Mason and the red case left at that private airport. Lauren had diverted a rescue helicopter for a business delivery while reporting the stop as medical coordination. At the next state review meeting held by video, Dana asked Lauren to explain the route. I attended as the reporting party, and Mason plus 3 lawyers filled the other half of Summit's screen. The private airport was the safest available landing site, Lauren said. Mr. Vale left there to transfer critical documents to state representatives. Dana placed the Continental acknowledgement on the screen. Which state representatives signed this? Lauren read it, and the color left her face. Mason leaned toward his lawyer, who requested a break. Dana refused. This is a preliminary safety conference, not a deposition. Chief Pilot Reed may answer or decline. If she declines, command restrictions remain. Lauren looked straight into the camera. I relied on Mr. Vale's description of the cargo. That was the first crack in their alliance. Did you observe Caleb Reed object to the passenger substitution? Dana asked. He raised concerns. Did he volunteer to remain? Lauren's lawyer touched her sleeve. Not in those words. My name had been dragged through television reports and employee meetings for 3 weeks, yet those quiet words broke the central lie. Dana extended Lauren's restriction and referred the manifest and route discrepancy to the state contracting office. The county separately froze payment on the Silver Ridge flight. Summit could no longer bill the mission as a medical rescue pending audit. Outside the conference room, Mason followed me into the hallway. You got your public humiliation, he said. Are you satisfied? The meeting was confidential. People will hear. They heard your version first. He moved close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. If Continental walks, the company may fail. Your shares will be worth nothing. Then you should have protected the company instead of using its aircraft as a courier. You always thought building the machines and writing the manuals made Summit yours. Lauren is the face people trust. A face is useful until the records speak. I walked away before anger could make my choices for me. That night, the television station that had called me bitter ran a correction. It did not apologize, but it reported that state officials had found evidence of a business stop and that Lauren acknowledged I had not expressly volunteered. The change was small, but employees noticed. The mechanic who had written about his daughter sent another message. I still need this company to survive, but I should not have blamed you for reporting it. I answered that I wanted the same thing. The first stage of my retaliation was not a destroyed company or a ruined career, it was simpler and more important. Lauren could no longer command a public rescue flight. Mason could no longer call the red case medical cargo without contradicting his own inventory, and no one could demand my signature while pretending the facts were unclear. I had taken back the truth. The money and control would be harder. The acquisition documents explained why Mason had been willing to gamble so much. Continental's purchase price included a bonus pool for executives who delivered Summit without unresolved safety findings. Mason would receive $800,000 at closing, plus a 3-year position leading Western business development. Lauren would receive command of the new Western Flight Division, a large retention payment, and authority over 22 pilots. My proceeds were larger because of my shares, but my future role lasted only 6 months after that. Continental could terminate me without cause. A private side letter described me as operationally essential to closing but culturally resistant to integration. Mason had written that phrase. Another schedule revealed the plan after Silver Ridge. If a shareholder caused a material closing failure through misconduct, the others could attempt a forced repurchase. At a discount, the clause was narrow and likely unenforceable against a good faith safety report, but litigation would take time. Mason was betting that financial pressure would make the legal question irrelevant. I added those documents to the wall chart under the fourth question: what did they gain if I signed? What did they gain if I refused? A chance to label me the cause, remove me, and buy my interest cheaply. Rachel reviewed the side letter at my desk. This helps establish motive, she said. It does not prove the evacuation violation. I know the flight records prove the violation. This explains why it happened. There is also a restricted share provision tied to Mason's 10%. Intentional government misbilling or material disloyalty can trigger repurchase at his original investment cost. Who decides? Arbitration. If he contests it, you cannot trigger it alone while Lauren votes with him. Then we preserve it until their interests separate. Rachel smiled faintly. You are learning to think like a partnership lawyer. I am thinking like an operations officer. Never activate a system before the route is clear. Lauren asked to meet at our house on Sunday. We had been alternating access under the temporary separation order. I arrived to find dinner on the table and my old Coast Guard mug beside my plate. I am not here to perform a marriage, I said. I am trying to talk without lawyers. Then talk. She sat across from me for several seconds, seeming to study the grain of the table. Mason and I started seeing each other again during the Denver negotiations, she said. It was a mistake. The admission hurt less than I expected. The choice at Silver Ridge had burned through whatever uncertainty remained. How long? 5 months. Did he promise you the Continental Division before or after? Her eyes hardened. That is cruel. It is relevant. Before. He said they needed someone with my record, and they needed my compliance signature. Yes. She pushed a folder toward me, a proposed settlement giving me the house, a cash payment funded at closing, and a consulting title with Continental. In return, I would approve the acquisition. Withdraw the state complaint where legally possible, and state that the Silver Ridge decisions were reasonable under emergency conditions. You cannot buy a factual statement from me, I said. You would get more than the house is worth from money that exists only if I sign the lie. The state can discipline me without you destroying everything. I did not alter the board, I did not falsify the manifest, I did not land at a private airport. She stood so quickly that her chair scraped the floor. You enjoyed watching Dana question me. No, I enjoyed hearing you finally answer. Lauren walked to the window, her reflection looked smaller than the woman who had commanded the helicopter. Mason told me the road was still open, she said. Baines said it might already be cut. Mason said you would be fine. You were the pilot in command. She turned. What do you want me to do? Correct every report. Disclose the business cargo. Stop blaming me. Accept the investigation and the divorce. And lose my career. You may lose the career move you chose over your duty. That is not the same as losing every ability you have. She gathered the settlement papers. Mason was right. You will let the company die to prove a point. The company has 48 employees and 6 aircraft. You speak as if it is your promotion wearing a corporate name. After she left, I photographed the settlement folder for my records and gave the original to Rachel. The offer was not illegal, but it established that Lauren still wanted a purchased version of the truth. The next week, I proposed an independent interim operator. Summit's operating agreement allowed the state or shareholders to approve a qualified outside manager during a command dispute. I named 3 candidates with no connection to me, each experienced in running emergency aviation programs. Lauren rejected all 3. Mason called the proposal an attempted takeover. Then the state contract office informed Summit that no new task orders would resume while Lauren retained operational control over public missions. 2 days later, she approved my second candidate, retired Air Operations Chief Nora Given. That decision did not restore my position, it did something more useful. It separated Summit's survival from Lauren's authority. Nora took control of scheduling, manifests, and state reporting. Employees could work without choosing between us. Lauren remained an owner and private contract pilot, but she could no longer change a public flight record. Mason had wanted to make every lost dollar look like my fault. The independent operator removed that weapon for the first time. The company could survive even if their deal did not. Mason's next attack came from inside the dispatch room. Summit submitted sworn statements from 11 employees saying I had created a culture of excessive documentation, slowed emergency decisions, and threatened to ground aircraft during disagreements. Most of the statements repeated the same phrases. One came from Eli Navarro. His declaration said I appeared agitated at Silver Ridge and had indicated an intention to remain until shutdown tasks were complete. It did not say I volunteered to miss the helicopter, but Mason's lawyers used it that way. Continental extended the closing deadline by 10 days and demanded that I resign from all management roles before it continued due diligence. The state delayed its preliminary finding to interview the employees. A hospital network then suspended negotiations for a winter transport contract, citing unstable leadership. That contract had been part of my plan to keep Summit alive after wildfire season, and losing it cut the company's projected winter cash by nearly 20%. It also damaged me personally. The arbitration lender who had considered advancing funds against my shares withdrew. My savings had fallen enough that I moved out of the house and rented a furnished room month to month. The room overlooked a parking lot and smelled like someone else's laundry detergent. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and wondered whether principal felt different when it could afford better furniture. The answer came quickly: it did not. I had made mistakes for years. I had allowed Lauren to treat compliance as a problem I would solve afterward, approved rushed scheduling changes, corrected incomplete forms without documenting who created them, and protected the company's reputation by keeping internal warnings quiet. None of that made this Silver Ridge report true. It did explain why Lauren believed I would clean it up. I wrote a supplemental statement to Dana listing my own prior oversight failures. Rachel warned that the admissions could increase my civil exposure if I hid them. Mason will reveal them at the hearing and call everything else selective. You may lose your claim to be reinstated. I no longer want my old role back. I want a company where the role means what the manual says. Nora Given began an independent audit of Summit's operations. I gave her no instruction about whom to blame. I asked her to identify which aircraft and crews could safely perform existing work, what reporting systems needed correction, and how much cash the company required to survive 6 months without the acquisition. Her first report was brutal. 2 helicopters needed maintenance earlier than our budget assumed. Training files had gaps, and Mason had promised state availability levels we could not meet with Lauren restricted. Summit would have to shrink. Lauren called the report sabotage. I approved it as a shareholder. You are voting to park 3 aircraft, she said during the meeting. I am voting to stop claiming 6 are available when only 3 can be supported. That cuts our value. It reveals our value. The other vote came from a local investment group that held a small non-voting note but could approve restructuring terms. They had no loyalty to me. They supported Nora because accurate capacity gave them a better chance of repayment. The hospital network canceled its negotiations the following morning anyway. That was my lowest point. I had prevented a false acquisition, but I had not yet protected the company that remained. Employees lost overtime. 2 pilots accepted work elsewhere. Mason used their departures in another press statement. Then Eli arrived at my rented office with Dana Hale beside him. I did not invite either of them. Dana had arranged the meeting after taking Eli's formal interview, and she kept the door open. Eli held a sealed evidence bag containing a backup storage module. I should have turned this over on the first request, he said, his hands shaking slightly. Mason told me the online archive was complete. It was not. Dana placed a receipt on the desk. This module was collected under the state request this morning. Mr. Navarro was not giving it to you. He asked to tell you why his statement was incomplete. I looked at Eli. Why was it incomplete? They showed me a draft that said you wanted to stay. I refused that wording. The version I signed said you intended to finish shutdown tasks. Mason said if I did not sign, Nora would identify me as responsible for the bad manifest and I would lose my license support. Why speak now? He glanced at Dana. The preservation notice had my name on the chain. If the state found the missing cash later, it would look like I hid it. I have a family. Losing my job is bad. Losing my dispatch certification for someone else's report is worse. It was not a sudden attack of conscience, it was risk becoming personal. What is on the module? I asked Dana. Raw radio traffic from the temporary base and synchronization logs. We will verify it before anyone relies on it. I did not ask to hear it early. I did not need special access. The ordinary detail that mattered was the small gray backup unit I had required every remote base to use after a network failure 4 years earlier. Mason had called the equipment unnecessary overhead. Now it contained the voices from Silver Ridge before anyone wrote a report. The verified radio file was 27 minutes long. Dana played the relevant portion at the next preliminary conference. Static filled the room, followed by Baines confirming the final passenger assignment. Reed is last aviation staff. He closes fuel and boards. Ground route uncertain. Then came Lauren's voice from the pad, copy. 1 seat after patient. Mason spoke several minutes later, farther from the microphone but still clear. The case has to reach Continental before their team leaves. I heard myself asking him to open it for Baines. I heard Lauren say Caleb can take the service road. I heard my refusal to volunteer. Finally, just before rotor noise overwhelmed everything, Mason said words none of us had heard clearly in the moment. Once he signs, none of this matters. Dana stopped the recording. Lauren's lawyer requested time to review authenticity. Dana placed the technical verification report beside the player. The cache had been sealed, its internal checksum matched the synchronization log, and the county's partial command recording overlapped the same traffic. Mason pointed at Lauren. She was pilot in command. I had no authority to select passengers. Lauren turned toward him. You told me the cargo was required for state reimbursement. I said the documents were time-sensitive. You called yourself medical liaison because you said that was the classification the manifest needed. Their lawyers tried to stop them, but fear had already done what evidence alone could not. It made their shared story less valuable than their individual escape. Dana asked me one question, Mr. Reed, did you complete the fuel shutdown before the aircraft departed? No. The final valve and power checks took 16 minutes after departure. Would taking the assigned seat have left a hazard? Baines had authorized the county mechanic to complete the checklist if I boarded. I stayed because the aircraft left without me, not because only I could close the base. The mechanic's incident statement confirmed that plan. He had been ordered onto the final truck when the road worsened. Dana issued preliminary findings that Lauren had knowingly changed passenger priority without an emergency care basis, that Mason's classification was unsupported, and that Summit's initial report was materially inaccurate. Final sanctions would require a public administrative hearing because Lauren contested the findings. The state contract office allowed Nora to resume limited task eligibility with 3 approved aircraft and independently reviewed manifests. It was not a return to full business, but it was enough to put crews back to work. That afternoon, I walked into Summit's hangar for the first time since my suspension. Nora had issued me a visitor badge for a shareholder inspection. Mechanics stopped what they were doing, no one applauded. Real workplaces rarely behave like movies. The mechanic whose daughter needed insurance came over and offered his hand. 3 ships are better than none, he said. That is the plan. Are you coming back? Not under the old structure. In the dispatch room, Nora showed me the revised board. Passenger priorities were entered by the incident authority, and any change required 2 names and a written operational reason. Cargo classification linked directly to the billing record. Lauren could not override either field, those were 2 remedies that only mattered in our world. The person controlling the aircraft could no longer rewrite the rescue order alone. The same cargo label used to justify a seat would follow the flight all the way to the public invoice. Mason had one remaining source of leverage, he controlled buyer communications, and Continental had not formally terminated the agreement. He circulated a revised proposal that cut the purchase price by 30%, removed Lauren's command role, and preserved his own closing bonus at half value. Lauren received it through discovery before he told her. She called me that night. He sold me out, she said. He adjusted his position to protect what he values. You sound pleased. I sound unsurprised. Help me remove him. We still control 90% together. There is no we. He falsified the cargo description, and you flew him. If I vote to trigger the bad act provision on his shares, will you settle the command case? No trades. If the provision applies, vote based on the record. I will proceed based on the record. She ended the call without saying goodbye. The following day, Lauren voted with me to place Mason on administrative leave from business development pending the billing audit. His access to new contracts and acquisition communications was suspended. And Nora supported the operational portion of the decision. It was the second major turn. Mason had entered Silver Ridge believing Lauren's authority and my signature would carry him into an $800,000 bonus, but now Lauren had helped remove him from the very deal he designed. I did not thank her, she had not chosen me, she had chosen the smaller threat, and the distinction was permanent. The county billing audit turned Mason's bad judgment into a financial offense. Summit had submitted a $47,000 invoice for the Silver Ridge mission, most of that covered legitimate patient transport and emergency flight time, but a separate line claimed that Mason had traveled as a state medical coordination officer carrying protected patient material. That line added $6,400 and allowed the private airport stop to be billed as part of the rescue. The invoice had been created the morning after the flight, Mason approved it electronically, and Lauren approved the attached flight narrative 2 hours later. County auditors did not treat every incorrect invoice as fraud. Vendors made errors, classifications could be disputed. What changed this one was the sequence of records. The executive asset log described the case before takeoff. The Continental acknowledgement described it after landing, and the radio recording captured Mason naming the buyer. Between those points, he certified to the county that both he and the case served a medical purpose. Dana referred the billing issue to the State Procurement Integrity Office. The county demanded repayment of the disputed amount plus contractual penalties. No one was arrested, and no prosecutor appeared to transform my life. The conduct did not require a theatrical criminal charge to create a serious consequence. A finding of intentional false billing could bar Mason from public emergency contracts and activate the Bad Act provision on his shares. Continental terminated the acquisition 3 days later. Its formal notice cited undisclosed safety findings, inaccurate public billing, and material changes in management. Lauren lost the Western Division before she ever sat in its office. Mason lost his bonus before he could negotiate a reduced version. My own expected sale proceeds disappeared too. I read the notice twice, then closed the file and went back to Nora's restructuring forecast. Revenge fantasies often skip the part where the person telling the truth also loses money. My 45% had been worth several $1 million under the proposed sale. Without it, Summit was a damaged regional operator with 3 working aircraft, debt on 2 parked aircraft, and a state contract under probation. I had not won a fortune. I had refused to receive one in exchange for becoming part of the lie. Lauren came to my office after dark. Rain had replaced the wildfire smoke, and water ran from her coat onto the floor. Continental withdrew, she said. I received the notice. Mason says they will reconsider if the hearing clears me. Their notice says termination is final. She placed both hands on the back of the empty chair across from me. I lost the division. Yes. You lost the sale too? Yes. Then what was the point? I turned the restructuring forecast toward her. 3 aircraft can support emergency backup, medical transfer, and utility work. We sell the other 3, repay the overdue maintenance facility, and rebuild qualification under NORA. The company survives at its real size. She stared at the figures. You planned for the deal to fail. I planned for the truth to have a cost. Her eyes filled, but tears did not alter the accounting. I was afraid everything I had worked for would disappear. So you decided I could disappear instead. I came back for you after the corridor closed, after you delivered the case, and after you filed a report saying I chose to stay. Returning does not reverse leaving. She lowered herself into the chair. Could we ever repair the marriage if I accept the state penalty? No. The word was calm because I had already lived through the answer. You do not even have to think? I have thought about it every night since Silver Ridge. I can stop fighting when the facts are corrected and the consequences are assigned. I will not restore your access to my home, money, trust, or decisions. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. Mason used me. You used my assigned seat. Both things can be true. Lauren left without asking for the photograph she had brought to my office weeks earlier. I placed it in the box of marital property for the lawyers to divide. The next morning, Nora presented the restructuring proposal to the shareholders and principal lender. We would sell 3 aircraft, close the satellite office in Bozeman, and reduce executive salaries before cutting crew pay. I waived all unpaid management compensation I had accrued during the dispute. Lauren objected to the aircraft sale because it would reduce the fleet she had built. Mason, attending through counsel, objected because it destroyed the scale story he had sold to buyers. The lender asked the only question that mattered: who has authority to operate after the state hearing? Nora remains interim operator, I said. If I regain a management role, safety decisions stay independent from shareholder votes. Lauren will not command public rescue work unless and until the state restores that authority. Lauren voted against the plan, Mason voted against it. Their 55% would normally have blocked it, but the operating agreement required lender approval for fleet debt, and the company was approaching a covenant default. The lender could repossess 2 aircraft or accept a supervised sale and bridge plan. Faced with that choice, Lauren agreed to the sale under written protest. Mason had no veto over collateral enforcement. The company began shrinking before the hearing. It hurt. It also ended the illusion that Mason's deal was the only future available. Mason offered one final settlement 2 weeks before the public hearing. His proposal arrived through counsel and ran 43 pages. He would surrender his management job, repay the disputed billing line, and transfer half of his restricted shares to Lauren. In exchange, Summit, Lauren, and I would release him from all partnership claims and support a statement that the passenger substitution resulted from shared emergency confusion. Lauren offered to accept a 6-month voluntary command suspension and correct the initial report. She wanted the state to close its case without a formal finding of intentional conduct. Together, the offers would make the company look healed. They would also make the lie permanent in softer language. I rejected them. Then I initiated partnership arbitration to enforce the bad act repurchase of Mason's 10% and recover losses caused by the false billing and undisclosed side arrangements. I also sought a ruling that my safety report could not trigger the discounted repurchase clause against me. Rachel filed the documents, but I made the timing decision. The billing audit had authenticated the invoice. Continental had authenticated the case delivery, the state had authenticated the radio cache. Acting earlier would have looked like a marital power grab. Acting now tied each remedy to a verified record. Mason responded by suing for defamation and interference with the acquisition. His complaint quoted my confidential safety filing as if it had been a public attack. Rachel moved to dismiss the claims based on protected reporting and truth, but dismissal would take months. I still had to disclose the suit to lenders and future clients. Lauren gave an interview outside the hangar. She admitted making imperfect choices but said I had exploited a crisis to seize corporate control after our marriage failed. This time I answered publicly. I stood beside Nora at a scheduled operations briefing, not a personal press conference. I confirmed that I would testify under oath, accept responsibility for my own past oversight failures, and support independent management regardless of who owned the shares. This is not a fight over who loved whom, I said. It is a question of whether a rescue priority, aircraft manifest, public invoice, and incident report can be changed to protect a private transaction. The records will answer it. I took no questions about the affair. The statement changed the frame. Local coverage began comparing documents instead of photographs of Lauren and me. The Business Journal published a timeline correcting its first article. Employees stopped receiving calls from reporters at home after Nora set a single information channel. Preparation for the hearing filled the next 10 days. I organized my presentation into decisions rather than accusations. Decision 1, the incident commander assigned the final seat. Decision 2, Lauren acknowledged that assignment. Decision 3, Mason presented business files as medical cargo. Decision 4, Lauren changed the passenger en route. Decision 5, Summit reported that I volunteered. Decision 6, Mason and Lauren approved a public invoice using the medical classification. For every decision, I identified the record created at the time, the evacuation photographs, the radio backup, the flight track, the asset scan, the delivery receipt, the first report, the edited report, the invoice, the acquisition schedules. I also prepared for their strongest argument that emergency pilots must have discretion. I agreed with it. Lauren had authority to change passenger priority if safety or patient care required it. If the helicopter had needed a medic, a firefighter, or lighter weight, I would have stayed without complaint. Her violation was not choosing under pressure, it was using emergency discretion for a business purpose and then changing the records to hide it. My own history would be used against me. Mason's counsel had found 3 earlier incidents in which I corrected reports after crews filed incomplete versions. In one, I allowed Lauren to add a weather justification 2 days after a route deviation. The justification was true, but my documentation of the late change was weak. I added those incidents to my testimony before Mason could reveal them. You are giving him ammunition, Rachel said. He already has it. The hearing officer may question whether I enforce standards consistently. She should. I helped create the culture that expected correction without consequence. I did not create the Silver Ridge facts. The day before the hearing, Eli received a written warning from Nora for failing to preserve the backup cache promptly and for signing an ambiguous statement under pressure. He kept his job but lost supervisory eligibility for 6 months. He thanked me for not asking Nora to erase the warning. I would have lost credibility if you got a free pass for helping me, I said. Mason said loyalty meant protecting the company. A company protected by false records is only protected until someone reads them. That evening, I moved from the furnished room into a 2-bedroom apartment near the airport, modest, but the lease was in my name. The second room became an office with a table large enough for the hearing files. I put no photographs on the walls. Lauren sent one message asking whether we could arrive together and present a united front against Mason. I answered through counsel, we did not have a united position. At dawn, I carried the records to the State Aviation Building myself. The hearing room held 40 chairs, 3 cameras, and a long table beneath the state seal. Every seat was filled. Dana presented the agency's findings first, precise and unemotional. Her role was not to punish Lauren for betraying me, it was to determine whether Lauren could be trusted with Public Rescue Command and whether Summit had met its reporting duties. Mason sat behind his own lawyer, no longer beside Lauren. Lauren wore her chief pilot uniform again. I wore a dark suit and the watch I had used to time the fuel shutdown at Silver Ridge. Lauren's counsel argued that the emergency had required quick judgment. He displayed maps showing the fire's movement and photographs of smoke over the pad, said my survival training made ground departure reasonable, and argued that Mason's business documents had included information necessary to keep rescue funding available. Then he called Lauren. She described the noise, the explosion, and the worsening wind. She said she believed the service road remained passable when she lifted. She admitted that Mason's role was not medical in the clinical sense but said she considered the acquisition essential to Summit's ability to serve patients. Dana asked one question on cross-examination: would an acquisition document give Mr. Vale priority over the assigned final evacuee under any approved rescue protocol? Lauren looked toward me before answering. No. Did Mr. Reed volunteer to surrender his seat? No. Why did your report say he did? Lauren swallowed. Mason drafted the report, and I approved it without correcting that language. Mason's lawyer rose immediately when Mason testified. He said Lauren had made every operational decision. He claimed he believed she had authority to classify him as mission support and that the invoice had been generated automatically by Summit's billing software. I knew the software. I had approved its purchase. When my turn came, I did not begin with the radio recording. I began with the evacuation board. I placed the county photograph beside my time-stamped photograph and explained the assignment system. The hearing officer could see my name in one, the erased space in the other, and Mason's name written over it. Next, I played Baines confirming my seat and Lauren acknowledging it. I stopped the audio before the argument. At this point, I said, the assignment was understood by Incident Command, the pilot, and me. I presented the asset scan and Continental receipt. A Continental Records custodian had authenticated the receipt that morning. No surprise witness appeared because the document came from her department. Then I showed the satellite flight track and the 26-minute private airport stop. Finally, I played the remaining radio exchange. My refusal to volunteer filled the room, and Mason's statement followed through the static. Once he signs, none of this matters. Mason stared at the table. His lawyer attacked my history. He displayed the 3 corrected reports and asked whether I had previously allowed Lauren to revise operational justifications. Yes, I said. So changing a report after a flight was normal at Summit? Correcting an incomplete report with true information was too informal and poorly controlled. I accepted that practice, and I was wrong. Yet only after your wife chose another passenger did you decide the practice was unacceptable? This was not a late correction. The first report added an event that never happened. The second removed that claim and added a separation that never happened. I refused both. He asked whether I wanted Lauren removed from the company. I want her removed from any authority the evidence shows she abused. Ownership will be decided under the operating agreement and divorce settlement. He asked whether I wanted Mason's shares. I want the restricted share clause enforced according to the billing finding. I am willing to pay the required repurchase price. I am not asking the state to transfer property to me. The hearing officer questioned me about shutting down the fuel system. I submitted the base checklist, my locator data, and the ranger station access log. Together, they showed when I left, where I traveled, and when I reached safety. The records existed because I had followed ordinary procedures while believing no one was coming back. After lunch, the county auditor explained that Mason's billing line was manually selected, not automatic. His user account shows medical coordination personnel, entered the red case as protected material, and added the private airport stop. Lauren's approval certified the flight narrative, though she had not created the invoice. Mason's last attempt was to blame Eli. He said dispatch had classified the passenger before takeoff. Eli testified that Mason entered the cargo line on the temporary manifest and instructed him to synchronize it. He admitted signing the later employee declaration because he feared losing his job. Dana produced the cash chain showing that Eli delayed disclosure but had not altered the file. No one treated him as a hero, but his evidence was useful because it matched records created independently. In closing, Lauren's lawyer asked for retraining rather than suspension. Mason's lawyer argued that procurement questions belonged in a separate process. Both were legally reasonable requests. I stood for my own final statement. I am not asking this office to decide my marriage, I said. I am asking it to protect the meaning of a rescue list. At Silver Ridge, the last seat was a public safety resource. Lauren gave it to a man carrying private deal papers. Mason converted that choice into a public invoice. They expected my signature to erase the difference. If the only consequence is a corrected form, then every future employee will know that records are optional when the deal is large enough. The hearing officer recessed for 2 hours. When she returned, she sustained the findings. Lauren's commercial pilot certificate privileges related to Summit operations were suspended for 1 year under the state's concurrent authority and referral process. And she was barred from serving as pilot in command or operations commander on state rescue contracts for 3 years. Reinstatement would require retraining, review flights, and a clean compliance finding. Summit received probation rather than contract termination because Nora's reforms separated ownership from operational control. The procurement office issued its companion determination against Mason. He had intentionally submitted a false classification for payment. He was ordered to repay the disputed amount with civil penalties and barred from participating in Montana emergency procurement for 5 years. Summit remained responsible for correcting the invoice, but avoided a broader penalty because it had preserved the records and installed independent management. Lauren closed her eyes. Mason whispered angrily to his lawyer. I felt no explosion of triumph. I felt the steady release of a weight I had carried since the helicopter lifted. The records had done exactly what records were supposed to do. They had made power answer to fact. The administrative hearing ended the public argument. It did not finish the financial one. 3 weeks later, partnership arbitration began in a private conference room near the airport. The issues were narrower now. Mason's restricted shares carried a bad act repurchase clause tied to intentional false billing and material disloyalty, and the procurement finding established both. He argued that the clause was an unfair forfeiture and that Lauren had approved the same conduct. The arbitrator agreed that Lauren shared responsibility, but her shares were not restricted under that clause. Different agreements created different remedies. Mason's 10% had been granted at a low original price specifically because he promised compliant growth and clean public contracting. The arbitrator ordered his shares repurchased at the formula price far below the failed Continental valuation. Mason received the return of his original investment plus required interest, not the $800,000 bonus or the millions he expected from unrestricted ownership. He was removed permanently from management, ordered to reimburse Summit for the county penalty and a portion of audit costs, and later settled his defamation suit by dismissing it with prejudice. His 5-year procurement ban made him unacceptable to the emergency services firms he had hoped to join. He found private sales work in another industry, but the public rescue market he had built his identity around was closed to him. I did not receive his shares for free. The company repurchased them using a restructuring loan guaranteed by its aircraft assets. Then retired part and reissued part under the new ownership plan. I accepted more debt and a lower immediate income to keep control from being concentrated in one marriage or one office again. Lauren. And I resolved the remaining ownership and divorce issues through a settlement after the arbitration. She could have fought for years, but the certificate suspension reduced her income, the aircraft sale reduced distributions, and the hearing record made another command fight expensive. Those interests brought her to agreement. Mercy did not. She sold her 45% under an installment structure funded by a local aviation investor, Summit's future profits, and my share of the proceeds from selling 3 aircraft. The price was based on the company's reduced real value, not Mason's discounted penalty formula and not the dead Continental offer. She received fair property value, but she lost control of the company and any claim to the promotion that had motivated her choice. The final ownership became 60% for me, 20.5% for an employee trust, and 15% for the local investor. The employee trust had voting rights on safety policy changes. No shareholder, including me, could overrule rescue priority or manifest controls for commercial reasons. The first meeting under that structure was held in the same hangar where Lauren had suspended me. 41 employees remained after the fleet reduction and voluntary departures. I did not stand on a platform. I stood beside the dispatch board and showed them the new ownership terms, the debt schedule, and the 12-month cash forecast. There is no rescue by a secret investor, I told them. There is no quick return to 6 aircraft. We have enough work to keep this team if we meet the state conditions and if every flight is priced honestly. If either condition fails, the numbers on this page fail with it. A senior pilot asked whether my 60% meant I could remove the employee trust later. Not without its consent and the investor's consent. That restriction is permanent. Another employee asked why anyone should trust me after I admitted allowing informal corrections in the past. You should not trust a promise, I said. Trust the separation of authority. The operations chief can ground my aircraft, the compliance committee can investigate my report, the employee trustees can block a safety policy change. If those systems work only while I am popular, they are not systems. No one applauded that answer. They read the documents, asked about insurance, and elected their first 3 trustees. That practical skepticism was healthier than the loyalty Lauren and Mason had demanded. The fleet sale closed in stages. One helicopter went to a utility operator in Idaho, another to a training school, and the oldest airframe was purchased for parts by a maintenance company. I watched each leave a hangar that had once looked permanent. Their sale proceeds paid the overdue maintenance facility, reduced the lender's exposure, and funded training required by the state. None of the money went into my personal account. For 6 months, I took the lowest executive salary permitted under the restructuring budget. I sold the expensive truck Summit had once leased for me and drove my old pickup. These were not gestures designed for sympathy, they were the arithmetic of keeping promises without asking mechanics and dispatchers to finance my pride. At the end of the first full quarter, Summit made a modest operating profit. The employee trust received no distribution because the reserve target had not yet been met. I received none either. We posted the result in the break room with the debt balance beside it. For the first time in years, employees could see the difference between revenue, value, and money an executive wanted them to believe would arrive later. Lauren did not go to prison, and she did not become destitute. Her consequences matched what she had done. She lost her role as chief pilot, her national division opportunity, her authority over Summit, and 3 years of eligibility to command state rescue missions. During her 1-year certificate suspension, she worked as a ground training consultant outside public contracting. If she wanted to fly afterward, she would have to rebuild trust one documented step at a time. Our divorce became final 7 months after Silver Ridge. We had no children, so there was no custody issue to disguise continued contact. We sold the marital house, and after paying the mortgage and dividing the remaining equity, I used my portion as part of the restructuring reserve. Lauren kept her retirement accounts and personal vehicle, I kept mine. Neither of us paid ongoing support. She asked once through Rachel whether we could speak privately after the divorce. I declined. Necessary communication about the installment sale went through counsel and the company's finance office. There were no anniversary calls, no friendly dinners, and no invitation to see whether time had changed my mind. I did not hate her. I also did not return access because she regretted losing it. Eli completed his 6-month supervisory restriction and additional dispatch training. Nora offered him a new position as independent safety record coordinator. He reported to the compliance committee. Not to me. His experience did not erase his weak statement, but it taught him which risk was worth taking. He accepted the job knowing that another omission would end it. Dana closed the state investigation after Summit passed 2 operational reviews. She never became my friend, and that increased the value of her conclusion. Her final report credited the preservation system, independent management, and corrected controls, while noting that my earlier informal oversight had contributed to the culture. I kept that sentence in every internal training copy. Summit did not return to 6 helicopters. We sold 3, paid down maintenance debt, and operated the remaining 3 on medical transfer, utility support, and limited state emergency work. Revenue fell sharply in the first year, so did executive pay. I drew a salary appropriate for a small operator and received no large distribution. On paper, my 60% was worth less than my old 45% had been before the fire. Financially, I was stable, not rich. I carried responsibility for the restructuring loan, maintained a 6-month operating reserve, and stopped using personal guarantees for company expansion. Every new project had to survive without my house, pension, or marriage acting as invisible collateral. I stayed in the 2-bedroom apartment near the airport. The second room remained my office, though I eventually placed one photograph on the wall. It showed Summit's 3 active helicopters lined up on a clear morning beneath the revised dispatch board. No executives stood in the picture. I returned as managing director, but not as sole safety authority, and stayed for 18 months to train a permanent independent operations chief. I focused on contracts, capacity, and systems. Any incident report involving me went directly to the Employee Trust Compliance Committee. If I expected rules to restrain Lauren, they had to restrain me too. The red case was returned to Summit after the audit. I removed its business development label and donated it to the State Training Center. In classes, instructors used it in a simple exercise. They gave trainees 1 helicopter, 1 seat, a medical patient, an assigned evacuee, a business passenger, and worsening weather, then asked which fact mattered. The answer was never who owned the company. 1 year after the fire, I visited Silver Ridge with Baines to review the rebuilt emergency site. The old trailer was gone, new fuel controls stood inside a wider cleared perimeter. Beside the landing pad, a weatherproof board displayed passenger priority with 2 authorization columns. Baines handed me a grease pencil. "Your company designed this one." "The employees designed it," I said. "I approved the budget." He nodded toward the ranger trail. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not made it?" "Yes." "Does that make the outcome feel better?" I looked across the valley where smoke had hidden the road and the helicopter. "It makes the rule feel necessary." My locator beacon, the access log, and the radio cache had proven where I went and what they said. The invoice and acquisition papers had proven why, but the deepest truth required no document. Lauren believed my competence made me safe to sacrifice. Mason believed my loyalty made me easy to control. I had spent years teaching both of them that I would absorb any cost to keep Summit and my marriage moving. Silver Ridge was the day I stopped. I did not recover the old company, the old house, or the old marriage. I recovered the right to decide what my work, name, money, and trust would support. Mason paid for the false bill and lost the public contracting career he valued. Lauren lost the command, ownership, promotion, and marriage she had treated as compatible with betrayal. Summit survived only after it stopped depending on my silence. Before leaving the rebuilt base, I wrote my name in the final inspection slot and completed the work. When the transport helicopter arrived, the pilot checked the board, confirmed every passenger, and asked for verbal acceptance before anyone boarded. There was an empty seat after the crew count. No one had to give it back to me because it was mine by the rules applied before the engine started. If your spouse left you at a wildfire base to protect a deal, would you have stopped at divorce? Or would you have pursued the records until the career and financial consequences matched the betrayal? And was Caleb right to rebuild Summit after losing millions in the failed sale, or should he have sold his shares and walked away? Share your judgment in the comments.